Ever since the first trailer dropped in 2020, Black Myth Wukong promised gamers that they could become a magical kung fu monkey, beating the ever-loving shit out of dragons and mythical creatures with a very big stick. It promised impressive visual presentation and excellent gameplay, and after spending considerable time with the game across multiple platforms and system configurations, I'm ready to share my unfiltered thoughts on exactly which stick you should use to murder everything that gets in your way. Because Black Myth Wukong is an excellent game, an excellent experience, and an excellent entry point to Souls-likes and boss rush games for broader audiences. Released in August 2024, Black Myth Wukong promised a visually stunning action experience that brings Chinese mythology to life. The game casts you as the Destined One, a staff-wielding stone monkey embarking on a quest to recover 6 relics corresponding to Sun Wukong's 6 senses. The core combat system is built on fundamentals that will feel familiar to action game fans: light attacks, heavy attacks, dodge rolls, and lock-on system. However, what elevates the combat is how these basics are enhanced by abilities drawn directly from Sun Wukong's mythology. You'll fly on clouds, transform your staff to various sizes, and utilize special abilities that create fun and interesting combat choices. Combat animations are crisp and fluid, with a satisfying sense of weight and power behind each strike. Perfect counters feel particularly rewarding, creating those moments of combat excellence that make you feel genuinely skilled. Combat isn't just flashy though, it has some depth. Different staff stances provide versatility, and transformations give you entirely new movesets and special effects to master. The resource management of focus, stamina, and mana adds strategic layers without becoming overwhelming. However, the combat system isn't without flaw. Input responsiveness can be frustratingly inconsistent on lower-end machines, and there were times where commands I entered simply didn't register, particularly during crucial moments. It wasn't until I started a new game on my new gaming rig that I noticed a significant improvement in responsiveness. The lock-on system can also be somewhat unreliable, especially when the camera isn't positioned optimally or you're in very narrow, low-ceiling spaces, which happen a fair few times throughout the game. Perhaps most egregiously are the stun mechanics, which can create situations where you're effectively helpless. Some enemies, particularly bosses, can stun lock you with barely any opportunity to escape. This isn't challenging design, it's frustrating design that removes player agency, and while I'm not against stun effects entirely, these all felt very cheap and lasted too long for them to be just an element of challenge. Along with a big stick and a penchant for monkey fist kung fu, the player has access to a handful of spells categorized into mysticism, alteration, strand, and transformation. Each spell has distinct cooldowns and mana costs, requiring strategic deployment rather than spam. Transformation abilities allow you to shapeshift into different creatures with unique movesets and health pools. The Red Tides transformation, for example, lets you become Guangxi, a wolfman wielding a flaming double-bladed glaive. These transformations don't cost mana, but operate on cooldowns and have their own resource called Might, which depletes during your transformation. The boss encounters represent some of the game's highest and lowest points. At their best, they're magnificent challenges that test both your reflexes and your problem-solving abilities. Each boss has distinct patterns to learn and weaknesses to exploit, creating a satisfying loop of observation, adaptation, and execution. The variety is really impressive, drawing from Chinese mythology to create memorable adversaries. From the Black Bear Guide to the 100-eyed Taoist Master, each has a unique visual identity and combat style, and most of them are incredibly fun to fight. However, several bosses rely on questionable design decisions. The Black Long boss exemplifies these issues. This encounter features electrical shockwave attacks that can only be avoided by standing on boulders. However, these boulders are easily destructible and get removed from play quite quickly and are never replaced, effectively removing your ability to counter a key attack unless you use a specific stance with a specific timing in order to just about mitigate the effect, as long as all the gods bless you in that moment. Many bosses also rely heavily on homing attacks that track you quite unnaturally. even when you use abilities specifically designed to avoid them. Area of effect attacks are often spammed to a degree that limits your strategic options to run away and wait. And hitboxes sometimes feel disconnected from the visual animations, leading to hits that feel unfair rather than challenging. The difficulty curve is also very inconsistent. Some visually impressive bosses turned out to be disappointingly simple and easy to murder, while others ramp up difficulty through frustrating mechanics rather than genuine challenge. The Mad Tiger, for instance, has a grab move that's particularly egregious, along with ceiling rocks that magically home in on you wherever you are, somehow. Character progression in Black Myth Wukong offers meaningful development without overwhelming complexity. The Destined One levels up by accumulating experience by defeating enemies. Leveling up grants you sparks, aka skill points, which you can allot to various abilities and spells, creating several options for build variety and playstyles. What's particularly praiseworthy is that the game lets you completely rebuild your character without restrictions or costs at any keeper shrine. This encourages experimentation with different playstyles without permanently punishing players for their choices, and I particularly enjoyed this because it allowed me to experiment as much as I wanted throughout my playthrough. Another progression layer comes from spirits acquired from defeating Yaoguai chiefs. These provide both passive effects and activatable skills when equipped, using Qi as a resource. The Wandering White Spirit, for instance, grants a headbutt attack that can be devastating in the right circumstances and has a passive defensive ability that will carry you through several bosses and chapters. This system rewards boss victories with meaningful mechanical advantages beyond just higher stats, and each of these spirits can be cultivated for increased effects. Vessels provide yet another strategic option, offering both passive effects and activated abilities that consume Qi. The Plantain Fan, for example, can create hurricanes that stagger enemies, providing tactical advantages in specific scenarios. These items can dramatically change encounter difficulty when used appropriately, but they're also a key part of the narrative. The Celestial Pills system for permanently increasing base stats represents one of the more significant progression mechanics. By crafting these pills, you can enhance health, mana, stamina, defense, and various resistances. However, this system exemplifies the game's obscurity issues. To craft these crucial upgrades, you must find a specific NPC hidden at the bottom of a tunnel in the face of a tiger, a location that is initially revealed to the player in an unnecessarily cryptic fashion. But we'll get to how side quests work later. Black Myth Wukong implements a relatively straightforward crafting system that focuses on equipment and consumables. The system is functional, but lacks the depth found in other games. Armor crafting forms the backbone of the equipment system. You craft pieces from materials either purchased from specific vendor NPCs or collected throughout the game world. These armors feature different properties and passive bonuses, theoretically encouraging strategic equipment choices based on your playstyle or specific challenges. For example, certain armor sets increase the duration of your freezing spell, while others provide bonuses for perfect dodges. However, the implementation falters in practice. The progression of gear is primarily numerical, with newer equipment almost always offering strictly superior stats. This results in an experience where the next piece of armor is almost always going to be significantly better than the last, meaning it doesn't really matter what property or stat or buff the last piece had, you're always going to want to use the bigger number, which undermines the strategic potential of the equipment system and reduces meaningful choices to simply equipping whatever has the highest base values. The healing system centers around two specific upgradable items: your gourd and the wine inside. Upgrading your gourd increases the number of uses available, enhancing your sustainability during extended encounters. Though some gourds come with specific passive enhancements, and it's always good to re-equip to give yourself an advantage in any situation. Wine upgrades, meanwhile, improve recovery amount and provide additional benefits. This system works well, providing meaningful progression that directly impacts survival capability. Material gathering is straightforward, but occasionally marred by interface issues, Sometimes you might find the thing that you should be able to gather, but the UI will fail to pop up for it if the camera is slightly off target, and sometimes it doesn't quite let you gather it. These inconsistencies, while not game-breaking, represent another example of the technical rough edges present throughout the experience. Recipe discovery is tied to exploration, and many valuable crafting recipes are hidden in obscure locations or locked behind side content that's quite easy to miss. While this approach can be rewarding for thorough explorers, it contributes to the feeling that significant content can be overlooked without exhaustive investigation of every environment. Despite these limitations, the crafting system adequately serves its purpose of providing character progression through equipment. When combined with the other progression systems like skills and transformations, it does create a satisfying sense of development throughout the journey. The power scaling feels immensely good and immensely satisfying, even if individual systems have implementation flaws, and all the armor looks pretty cool. Make no mistake, this is a visually stunning game. Even on my older machine running medium to low settings, the game looked quite pretty. The attention to detail is genuinely impressive, from minute reflections to intricate lighting, and from dynamic cloth physics to how feathers on Wukong's cap move in the wind. Everything comes together to create a very impressive and cohesive visual presentation that made me enjoy looking around at my surroundings in between bouts of magical monkey violence. The cinematic framing is particularly noteworthy. Game science clearly understands how to present this world in a way that maximizes visual impact. Whether you're traversing the barren yellow wind ridge or fighting through the flaming mountains, each area has its own distinct visual identity, while maintaining a consistent artistic direction, which I really appreciated. However, the technical implementation shows some significant compromises. On my high-end system with an RTX 4090, I still encountered some performance issues, particularly with ray tracing enabled. Turning ray tracing from cinematic to low immediately boosted my frame rate from struggling 20s to a solid 50 FPS. Turning it off completely pushes me well above 60 FPS, and that's with almost all the other settings set to epic. There are also noticeable visual inconsistencies. Texture popping is particularly evident in the desert and snow biomes, while you'll see obvious squares in the ground where textures aren't loading properly. These aren't game-breaking, but they certainly break immersion and remind you that you are playing a game, and not in a good way. Now, the developers did include a compatibility mode for lower-end systems, which deserves recognition. It allows players with modest hardware to experience the game, albeit with compromises. And I first played the game on my potato machine before I bought my new gaming rig. And while it wasn't ideal, it was surprisingly playable. But the inclusion of that compatibility mode is no excuse for poor optimization, and I hope game science learn from the experience of developing this game and use it to do better for their next title. Another persistent annoyance, which I hate in literally all video games I find it in, is the vignette effect that darkens the edge of the screen. This cannot be disabled, and as someone who values clear visibility in games, action games in particular, I found this absolutely frustrating. I don't want my game to look like I'm peering through a camera lens. It's not immersive, it's distracting, and I'm playing a video game, not watching a fucking movie through a film camera. The game is divided into 6 chapters, each focusing on a specific location. Blackwind Mountain, Yellowwind Ridge, the New West, the Webbed Ridge, Flaming Mountain, and Mount Huaguo. This linear approach maintains narrative momentum while providing distinct environmental challenges and a variety of enemies suited to the particular narrative chapter and regional biome. The enemies themselves draw heavily from Chinese cultural and natural landscapes, incorporating real-world locations like the Yungan Grottos and Dazu rock carvings. This grounding in actual Chinese architecture and landscapes lends authenticity to the world, and I really appreciate the devs' efforts to research them to make them as authentic as possible without needing to rely on cultural sensitivity consultants who do nothing but inflate their costs. Keeper's Shrine acts as checkpoints and places to access features like leveling, respecking options, medicine crafting, and fast travel points. Placement of these is generally well considered, creating a rhythm of exploration, combat, and respite. These checkpoints prevent excessive frustration by ensuring you don't lose significant progress upon death, but players will still have to be attentive when traveling between points so they don't get bodied at the last second. Combat arenas vary significantly in quality. Some provide adequate space and interesting environmental elements to incorporate into your strategies. Others, particularly certain boss arenas, feel artificially constrained in ways that exacerbate already challenging encounters. The Black Long boss arena, for example, is a lot smaller than it appears, which compounds the frustration of dealing with those copious AoE stun attacks. A thoughtful touch, though, is the inclusion of meditation spots specifically positioned to showcase the game's visual splendor. Similar to Ghost of Tsushima's haiku locations, these moments encourage players to pause and appreciate the environmental craftsmanship. It's a mechanic that explicitly connects gameplay to visual appreciation, acknowledging the artistry that went into creating this world, and I enjoyed that they were there. It also helped that they provided in-game benefits and didn't take me out of the fight for too long. Where the level design falls short is in its approach to hidden content. Crucial items and side quests are often tucked away in obscure locations with little to no guidance. While some players might enjoy this old-school approach to secrets, it can lead to significant content being missed entirely without resorting to either guides or being an OCD-ridden madman like me who literally explored every single nook and cranny just in case. The side quests themselves are also quite shallow in presentation and often unclear in their objective until they result in a narrative-driven cutscene that make about as much sense as all the others do when you don't have the greatest familiarity with the lore and mythology. Black Myth Wukong establishes an appropriate difficulty level for most players. It's challenging enough to be satisfying without reaching the punishing extremes associated with some notorious Souls-like titles. This balanced approach allows the game to appeal to a broader audience while still providing genuine options for challenge for more experienced players. What the game does exceptionally well is creating what I call the struggle worth having. After repeated failures against a difficult boss, the game masterfully pushes you to that point where you have the quintessential realization of, I can take him. This creates a deeply satisfying sense of accomplishment when you finally overcome these challenges. And throughout my entire playthrough, I never actually rage quit, which speaks volumes about its balanced approach to difficulty and frustration. The game provides multiple tools to address different challenges. Special items called vessels can dramatically turn the tide in specific scenarios, making what would be challenging boss fights almost trivial when used correctly. This creates an interesting dynamic where knowledge, preparation, and going down the less beaten path can significantly impact difficulty. The skill reallocation system allows complete character rebuilds without restrictions or costs, encouraging experimentation with different playstyles. This flexibility is commendable, allowing players to adapt their approach based on the challenges they're facing, meaning that if you're finding a particular boss or encounter difficult with the build that you have, you can always change to one that's more suitable to that challenge. However, the difficulty design isn't without significant flaws. The most problematic aspect is the reliance on stun mechanics that can effectively remove player agency, and some enemies, particularly bosses, can stun lock you in ways that feel virtually unavoidable and are seemingly designed to trap players in endless damage loops. Certain boss attacks also track the player unnaturally, even when using abilities specifically designed to avoid them, undermining the skill-based foundation of the combat system and creates more areas of frustration rather than satisfying challenge. The difficulty curve is inconsistent, creating jarring spikes rather than smooth progression, having only a few bosses that really caused me the sort of problems that had me retrying the same fight for days. The rest of the time, I was able to body almost any enemy without difficulty, and this was only made even more ludicrous by the Pluck of Many spell. For those seeking greater challenges, the New Game Plus mode and Challenge mode provide extended difficulty options. These post-game options also sensibly increase the challenge after players have mastered the core systems, extending the game's longevity without compromising the initial experience. Some of the most challenging content is optional, allowing players to engage with some of the most difficult encounters by choice rather than necessity. This approach respects player agency while still providing content for those seeking maximum challenge. Combat sound design is particularly impressive. The weighty impact of your staff against enemies, the whooshing of air as you dodge, and the distinctive audio cues for special abilities all contribute to the satisfying feel of combat. These effects provide crucial feedback that enhances gameplay responsiveness, allowing you to react to situations even when the visual cues might be obscured or out of camera view. The musical score complements the Chinese mythological setting appropriately, blending traditional instruments with orchestral arrangements, and some of the boss fight themes actually slap, building tension and elevating these encounters beyond their already impressive visual presentations. The native language performances were also quite enjoyable, and I appreciate the quality and authenticity of them. The delivery captured that quintessential quality of Chinese storytelling, maintaining that sense of importance and drama that's characteristic of their storytelling tradition. If there's a real criticism to be made here, it's that the audio mixing occasionally struggles during the most chaotic encounters, when multiple enemies are attacking simultaneously while environmental effects are occurring, can cause important audio cues to get lost in the mix, and sometimes things can sound a little muddy. This is relatively minor, but can impact gameplay in those specific moments where distinguishing the different attack sounds becomes crucial. Black Myth Wukong builds its narrative foundation upon Journey to the West, one of China's 4 great classical novels, but takes a thoughtful approach to adaptation rather than simply recreating the original story. The game presents an intriguing, if not completely original, premise. Sun Wukong, having achieved Buddhahood after his famous pilgrimage with Tang Sanjiang, rejects life in the celestial court for the simpler pleasures of Mount Huaguo. This decision triggers the central conflict as the mistrustful court sends Erlang Shen to force his submission. The initial confrontation results in Wukong being sealed in stone and severed from his 6 senses, each corresponding to a physical. This clever narrative device creates both the game's central quest structure and its thematic backbone. As the Destined One, a stone monkey seeking to recover these relics, you're essentially going on a journey to restore a fragmented identity, a metaphorical and literal quest that gains greater significance as the story progresses. The storytelling employs a mixture of in-game dialogue, environmental narrative, and striking animated cutscenes that conclude each chapter. These cutscenes serve not merely as plot delivery, but as philosophical reflections on the themes explored. The first 3, for instance, resonate with Chinese philosophical concepts, while latter ones delve into emotional territories like love, grief, and anger. This layered approach elevates a narrative beyond simple adventure tropes. Throughout your journey, you encounter significant features from Chinese mythology, including Zhu Baizhi, an old friend of Sun Wukong who joins your quest after being freed from imprisonment. These character interactions are generally well written, though some side characters receive limited development due to the game's forward-driving pace. The narrative primarily serves the action rather than dominating it, striking an effective balance between storytelling and gameplay. Environmental storytelling effectively complements the explicit narrative. However, the narrative suffers from clarity issues. Some critical plot developments rely on catching specific dialogue hints that are really easy to miss. The game also sometimes assumes familiarity with Chinese mythology that Western audiences may lack, leading to confusion about character motivations or relationships. And while this cultural authenticity is commendable, the lack of accessible context can leave players struggling to follow important story threads. The world also feels strangely underpopulated at times, with limited NPC interactions outside of key story moments. This creates a disconnect between the supposedly rich mythological setting and the relatively sparse narrative world you actually experience. More incidental characters and conversations would have helped out the cultural context and made the world feel a bit more alive. The presentation of narrative content is also somewhat inconsistent. Main story elements receive lavish cinematic treatment, while side content is often delivered through minimal dialogue and text. This disparity makes optional stories feel like absolute afterthoughts rather than meaningful extensions of the world building. Where the narrative truly shines is in its philosophical conclusion, tied to its multiple endings. but I won't spoil it here. What I will say is that the way both endings are structured provide a meaningful final choice that echoes the game's themes of destiny and free will. This narrative sophistication demonstrates respect for both the source material and the player's engagement with the story's philosophical dimension, and it was a pleasant surprise. In December 2024, GameScience released a free update that added several meaningful features to the game. The most significant addition was a boss rush mode, unlocked after completing the story campaign, which allows players to test their skills against the game's most challenging encounters in sequence for new rewards. The update also included chapter maps, addressing one of the navigation challenges in the base game. This quality of life improvement helps players better understand the game's environments and locate points of interest, though it doesn't fully resolve the issues with obscure side content. GameScience have also confirmed that GameScience have also confirmed that an expansion is in development, though they've been careful to manage expectations about its release timeline. In a September 2024 interview, CEO Feng Zhi addressed rumors of a Chinese New Year release for the expansion, clarifying that they, quote, don't regard an expansion to be completed soon, as they aim to achieve higher quality standards and need time to explore new technologies and themes. Black Myth Wukong is a remarkable achievement that successfully delivers on its core promise, allowing players to experience Chinese mythology through engaging action RPG gameplay. The visual presentation is genuinely stunning, creating an immersive world that brings Journey to the West to life in a way no game has before. The combat system, despite flaws, provides a truly satisfying foundation that balances accessibility with depth. Boss encounters at their best create memorable challenge that test both skill and strategy. Progression systems reward persistence and exploration, even if some content is frustratingly obscure. And most importantly, combat is fun, and most bosses were fun to fight. The technical issues and design flaws prevent the game from achieving perfection. Performance optimization, input responsiveness on lower-end systems, and certain combat mechanics could all benefit from refinement, and some boss designs rely too heavily on frustrating mechanics rather than genuine challenge. Yet despite these shortcomings, my overall experience was overwhelmingly positive. The game promised the experience of being a magical monkey beating up dragons with a stick, and it delivered on that promise with style and substance. The power scaling and skill progression felt rewarding, and the narrative provides a satisfying conclusion to the journey. In the landscape of action RPGs with challenging combat, Black Myth Wukong carves out its own identity while sharing its DNA with Souls-like games. It is generally more accessible, and it still provides a satisfying challenge. So for those interested in experiencing Chinese mythology in game form, or anyone seeking a challenging action RPG with stunning visuals, Black Myth Wukong is an easy recommendation. It's not perfect, but its strengths significantly outweigh its weaknesses, and it's an excellent experience that's well worth your time and money. Feel free to leave your thoughts and feedback in the comments below. I always appreciate it, and it really does help me make something you can trust and value to give you as much useful analysis and information as possible when you're planning to buy and play a new video game with your hard-earned money. Hit the subscribe button, maybe even the bell button, and whichever thumb you think the video deserves. And as always, my people, take care of yourself.